Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana.
Ooh, Diana, for some reason, your voice sounds very radio today. It's like, I don't know. It's different.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and this is me, your lovable pal, Jackie.
That was your Delilah version, huh?
That was my Delilah
It was very
version.
nice.
What do you, sorry.
Keep going.
I'm sitting on the wrong side
I
from
know,
where we're recording.
All backwards.
Apparently, my podcast hosting behavior is under a really tight stimulus control that has now been disrupted. It's back. Okay. Now I'll be able to continue on with our show about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and we discuss some relevant research articles. And I usually have a bit prepared, but I'm on the wrong side, so I didn't have a bit prepared.
Did you wake up on the wrong side of the podcast this morning?
Oh, yeah, I'm sitting on the wrong side of the podcast. That's for darn tootin'.
I wonder if you messed up your sleep hygiene by doing that.
Since I'm awake, I doubt it, but you know what? We should probably ask an expert on the subject before jumping to any conclusions.
Fair enough.
Fortunately, we have said expert on the show. We're joined by a special guest to talk all about sleep treatments, and that is Emily Varon. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is already entertaining.
I'm sure it's as much fun for the listeners as it is for the rest of us.
I think you just have to switch seats with Diana. I think that's I think it's ruined your juju for the day.
I'll get back into it, once we get into the conversation piece, I think, but it's those initial startups, I think maybe it's a little like sleep routines. Once you change a little thing, you forget how you've done it the same way over and over, and it just throws you. Throws you all out of whack.
I brought you a coffee and everything.
Yeah,
I know, that was very nice of you.
It's because you're sitting in my spot, Diana.
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll power through. We will power through. This is going to be a fun topic. Sleep is something that we haven't talked about on the show for, 200-ish episodes.
Yes. Wow.
Which, really dates the podcast when you can say anything over, a few episodes, hundreds of episodes ago.
But not because it's not an important topic.
No.
It's a super important topic, one that's well within our wheelhouse as behavior analysts, and one of my favorite topics. So I'm glad we're coming back around.
From a scientific perspective, or is that a personal statement?
I love to sleep.
Okay.
You know this about me.
I do.
I'm great at it, too.
She's one of the best.
It's a primary reinforcer.
Yeah, she's one of the best sleepers I know.
Yeah, I am.
It's a good skill to have.
Yeah, thank you.
So, since this has been so long, Emily is here to kind of bring us up to speed. The last time we talked with Dr. Sandy Jin about very specific research article that she had done on the topic of sleep. So this one is going to be a bit broader as we sort of look at what's out there, what's changed in the past few years, what are sort of the, spoiler, not really consensus treatment packages that are out there, but the ones with the most research. So this is going to be kind of a big picture look at sleep. So we're very excited to talk all about it. We have two articles that we'll be mainly discussing. And Diana, what are they? I've thrown you out.
That's me.
I've thrown you out of whack because you also are running
I'm eating cookies.
the recording software.
Yeah, this is not good. Okay. We have two articles that will inform our discussion today. They include behavioral interventions for sleep problems in children with autism spectrum disorders, current findings and future directions. And that's by Vrend, Corkum, Moon, and Smith, published in the Journal of Pediatric Psychology back in 2011. And we will also be discussing quantitative analysis of behavioral interventions to treat sleep problems in children with autism, which is a very daunting title, I must say.
Actually, this is one of my favorite articles at the moment, only because it's one of the only meta-analyses really that we have. And it's from 2019, so it's not even super recent. But yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, it's a good one. And it is by Carnett, Hansen, McLay, Neely, and Lang, published in Developmental Neurorehabilitation. And maybe this is the official version, came out in 2020. I bet the preprint was 2019.
Excellent.
Yep, that's the plan.
That's the plan. I like that plan. But Emily, before we get started, please tell us about yourself and how you became interested in sleep so much that you want to talk about it on the show.
How did I become interested in it? My children being born, that's when I got interested in it. My daughter was born in 2008, my son 2010. And before my daughter was even born, I was obsessed with sleep, and I was just worried about how little I was going to get of it. And I had committed myself to sleep training at the earliest possible moment. And that was like, I use sleep training very loosely. It's a big beast that we can talk about in a little bit. But anyway, I read all the books and I was trying to decide on which method would be best for my family and my child. And I ended up reading probably 6 different books and had all the context and ended up using, a Sleep Easy solution, whatever. It was the most ABA. But as I was moving through it, I realized that all of the books are ABA and none of them were written by BCBAs. So as I was looking through, that one actually had a data collection part in the back and had a lot of baseline and stuff like that to take. But yeah, I've been in the field since 2000, so I've been in the field quite some time. So by the time 2008 came around, I was just starting my BCBA coursework to become certified. I became board certified in 2011, started a new company. We moved from LA down to Orange County, about an hour south, and I started a company where I rested my head for 10 years. But on day one, I went out and I overlapped with my director at the time, Dr. Andy Brennan, who is with Blue Sprig now. I adore her. She's just amazing. She's the one who sort of fed my passion. I overlapped her day one. Actually, it was October 1st. Would be my 13th anniversary. 13 years ago is when my life changed for good with sleep. Went out, overlapped 3 kids. All 3 had sleep problems. This was 2010, so I had already had my second child. I'd already done all the reading, had already done all the sleep things from all the other people besides all the ABA people. But I went out and all 3 kids had sleep problems. And so I just sort of asked her if she wouldn't mind if I gave some feedback. I gave some tips that fell into the do no harm category, things like lighting, setting, kind of screen time. Screens weren't really as profound in 2010 as they are today, but there was some, TV viewing pretty late at night, things like that. And so I just, we made some minor changes and I said, let me know how it goes. And she said, oh, I will let you know how it goes. She was like with those big doubting eyes, like, okay, what's this person, come in with? And, sure enough, all 3 of them were sleeping through the night by the week and a half later. And at that point,
I bet you were like, boom.
Mic dropped. No, but at that point, she said, look, this is something you're good at. Keep doing it. And I'm just so grateful for being at that company at that time because everyone was really excited for this new resource that they had. And so I just started being referred onto all different cases and started doing my own research to make sure I was treating within, our ethical guidelines and not using anything that was just anecdotal or anything, because Facebook groups weren't as big back then as they are now, but it was entirely possible that I could give nonsense information that was just based on my own parenting style, which obviously, parenting styles isn't science. So, I wanted to make sure that I was, treating within a canon of research, even though it wasn't necessarily ABA research. And then in 2012, I was at Cal ABBA and I saw Greg Hanley speak. And I was like, oh, see, I told you it was behavior. See, I knew it all along. And so just, participating in that gave me a lot of validity or validation, actually. And I felt really confident in treating, kind of from there on.
Excellent. And Emily, as you're kind of, discussing your own experiences using sleep treatments in your own household, I think sleep is one of those topics where if you're a BCBA, you have some amount of knowledge of sleep treatment in the fact that you sleep. You may have had your own troubles with sleep. If you were a parent BCBA, you could read an article like the articles that we're discussing today and like me say, oh, I did that one. Oh, I did that one too. So like stimulus fading. I know we did that with our oldest son. We did a very slow process of moving from in the bed to next to the crib to down to the rocking chair to out the door. I still remember some of the articles I was reading at the time.
Oh, go ahead.
On what was I reading? Oh, on distance learning, way pre-pandemic, reading all about distance learning and the power of distance learning as I'm waiting outside for the right amount of time before I move away. way.
Yeah.
And then with our other children, certainly looking at kind of, probably known as, I think, if you've read parenting books, or for folks out there who've read parenting books, usually I've seen it as like the Ferber method, but sort of that, graduated extinction. I did that. I remember exactly what I was reading in those. I have 10 minutes before I go back in. I have 5 minutes before I go back in. That I was reading comic books in bed. I remember that now. But everyone's kind of got some experience with it, but not necessarily in a way where they would have named it as anything other than, oh, that's the thing in the baby book about the sleep.
Yeah. Exactly. But as behavior analysts, we look at that and we go like, that's stimulus feeding.
Well, I didn't, because it was like 2 a.m. So I was like, I wonder what this is called. I was like, I hope this ends
There
so
must
soon.
be a behavioral term for it. I'm sure of it.
Rob is very good at sleep training
I did for
the
2
children.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He did a really good job. I cannot stay awake to do it very well.
I mean, in your
So-
defense, you were asleep during the sleep training.
Yeah, I know.
So you missed it.
So I missed a lot.
It was a lot of fun.
That's like
Great times.
definitely
Lucky you.
Rob's area.
Yeah, I know. Should have read more about it, I guess.
I'm pretty sure my husband was out playing poker the nights that I sleep trained my children.
Oh,
My husband had nothing to do with our sleep training whatsoever. He was like, the baby cried last night. He's like, him and Diana were sleeping, not together, but in bed. But
we're both asleep wherever we
both
were.
asleep, like dead asleep. I'd be like, didn't you hear her crying all night? He's like, no, I had like the best night's sleep of my life.
And then there's all that maternal resentment, right? You talk about maternal malaise, maternal resentment. Like, no wonder.
Well, that's why I want to give Rob credit, right? Because for me, that I just would accidentally extinguish because I wouldn't wake up, which is kind of bad. But Rob's a really light sleeper, so he handled it. So kudos to you.
Yep, I did it. Yeah. Well, that's all I know about sleep. All done now. So Emily,
the point is, a lot of these techniques, even if they aren't called it, really rely on behavioral techniques and principles, even if people don't necessarily realize it, and they're coming at it just through the parenting books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, correct. 100%.
Yeah. So Emily, a question I had in reading these articles, because both articles are focused on the prevalence of sleep disruption, sleep problems with autistic children, and the impact that can have on parents, the impact it will have on the children themselves. But in reading the articles, in terms of what research was available, it didn't seem like it was very focused on individualizing the treatments because the children or because the participants were autistic, so much as using just general principles about sleep treatment. Is that kind of what you found yourself, that it's sort of sleep treatments, or is it more a matter of we just don't have enough of a body of really tightly controlled research to say one way or the other?
I think that's a hard question to answer. There's definitely more sleep research on the neurotypical population. There's definitely a lack of behavioral studies that focus on, let's say, children with autism. If we're talking about autism specifically, I don't know why that is. I don't know why sleep has fallen out of fashion in the world of ABA. If you look at that article, it's a meta-analysis from, I think the articles were gleaned between 1996 and 2014, and total for inclusion were 18 studies. Mm-hmm. And, sleep, feeding, and toileting are kind of like the trinity, right? That's the ones that families struggle with the most. Sleep being, I think, the base of the pyramid from a health and wellness standpoint, a family well-being standpoint, happiness standpoint, learning standpoint. We're asking these poorly slept children to perform tasks, and then we wonder why they misbehave, or we wonder why they're not making any progress, but we never think to look at sleep as the culprit. So I don't know why there is a lack, but I think you would be accurate in saying that most of them are, based on what's already out there, I suppose, as far as current sleep treatments. And I don't find that any of the research is very dynamic in the methods that they are investigating. I mean, it's pretty much extinction, graduated extinction, and, sleep restriction. I mean, that's pretty much it. And when we say sleep restriction, it sounds very terrible, but it really just means waking the child up at the same time, making sure they don't sleep during the day if they're too old, shortening naps if we need to shorten a nap, offering bedtime at the same time. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about sleep restriction. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all the research. But we know as behavior analysts that there are so many other treatments that we could be offering, but we don't offer them for sleep because perhaps we don't have enough research on it. Perhaps, we don't know. But the thing is, we do have the research on it. It's just not in relationship to sleep. We know stimulus feeding works. In every other thing, why wouldn't it work for sleep, right? We know that, positive reinforcement of desired behavior works, right? If we find a replacement behavior that we want to see more, we know that we should positively reinforce that behavior. That's not, we can easily apply that to sleep when we're talking about behavioral quietude before falling asleep. We can reinforce that. But for whatever reason, the two have not met very nicely. but it's out there. I mean, the research is there. We don't make it up. It's there. It's just, how are we applying it to sleep? And when we're talking about something like graduated extinction, the Ferber method, if we really look at the Ferber method, it's not really graduated extinction. It's more positive reinforcement of crying behavior. Mm-hmm. And so why are we doing that? Why do we choose that as the method of teaching if, in our ethics code, we're talking about prioritizing positive reinforcement strategies? Mm-hmm. That's my soapbox for the day. Yeah. I'm done. No.
So I think when we talk about sleep, while you're totally right. I don't think any behavior analyst would read these articles and have their minds blown of, I've never heard of any of these concepts that are being described here. Right. It does feel like it's a lot of the variance that comes with sleep. Like sleep almost gets its own special, pillar in terms of treatment, in terms of need. Before we get into a little bit more of that, though, what are the common sleep problems that are typically being addressed?
Yeah. So delayed sleep onset is a big one. So we can call it sleep latency. We can call it delayed sleep onset. But basically, it's when caregivers expect their child to fall asleep at one time, but they're not falling asleep until another time. Usually some hours later, and that's the primary complaint caregivers bring us. So delayed sleep onset, also multiple night awakenings. So, they sleep for a couple hours, they fall asleep fine in big air quotes, and then they're up the rest of the night. Every hour, every 2 hours, something like that, 4 to 6 times a night could be. That's another complaint. Similar to that is long awakenings in the middle of the night. So up for more than, let's say, 30 minutes in the middle of the night. They're up for an hour, they're up for 2 hours, and then they fall back asleep at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then, caregivers don't know what to do. Do we let them sleep? Do we let them sleep in or wake them up? That's a big problem. And then early morning awakenings, which kind of goes along with that same one. It could be they wake up at 4 in the morning and they're up for the day, or they're up at 2 in the morning up for the day, or sometimes they fall back asleep. So I would say those are the main sleep concerns that families bring to us. Mm-hmm.
Emily, typically when we're talking or when you're seeing problem behavior around sleep, so you're seeing either the night waking or longer sleep onset, I'm assuming that there's often a combination of problems. It's not just, oh, my child wakes up, but I don't know it because they sit quietly in their bed, or, oh, they just lie there quietly and I wish they'd go to sleep earlier because they just seem a little tired in the morning. Or is it typically just, I'm not going to sleep, therefore I'm waking up? Or I'm waking up in the middle of the night, now I'm starting to co-sleep and I'm coming into your bed. Is it sort of a combination, or is it as it's this problem or that problem?
No, it's never this or that. Actually, I always tell the people who are learning from me, I always say the problem's not the problem. Multiple night awakenings, that's not the problem. That's the symptom of the problem, but that's not the actual problem. That's the problem caregivers are reporting because that's the most intrusive component of it, but it's really up to us to figure out why that's happening. And it's not always for the same reasons. And if we only ABC it, if we just say, oh, well, they're coming out for attention, well, sure, that could be the case. But why aren't they maintaining their sleep overnight? What is happening at the beginning of the night? What is happening with their sleep hygiene? What is happening with schedules? Whatever it is, we sort of need to be detectives and figure out why is it that they are seeking that in the middle of the night, and not just walk them back to bed 1,000 times, because, that can work temporarily, but it's not a fix, because the reason they're coming out of bed is probably, we point fingers to what's happening as they're precipitating sleep at the beginning of the night. So that's, where, parents who have read all the books, we go, oh yeah, it's because we were helping them fall asleep. And, but that's not super common knowledge. You have to have read the books or done the research to understand that a deficient sleep dependency, like a caregiver laying down with a child, or like feeding to sleep or being held to sleep, or the lights on when the child falls asleep, and then parents go in and they're like, oh, we don't want to waste electricity. They shouldn't sleep with the light on, then we turn it off. All of those things will precipitate middle of the night awakenings. So if we don't fix what's going on at the beginning of the night, we're not going to be able to fix the problem in the middle of the night by just walking the child back to bed. So the problem's not the problem. If we just try and fix the problem, we're going to end up with it biting us in the butt. It won't be sustainable. It just won't be sustained,
So it's less about sleep problems being problem behavior and requirement or need of a treatment, and almost like the skill acquisition around various sleep type behaviors. Like you've got to learn to sleep better in a way, or is that oversimplifying it?
That's oversimplifying it. I think we don't look enough at the setting events, and we don't have enough information from our BCBA schooling, right? BCBA classes don't teach us about the setting events that need to be intact in order to precipitate healthy sleep, sustained sleep overnight. So you really can't teach the biological mechanisms of sleep. But if we look at it as a huge contingency where everything leading up to that biological occurrence is susceptible to contingency, then we go, okay, well, what's controlling that reinforcing value of sleep? Because if sleep's the primary reinforcer, we should want to sleep every night, right? But why do children hate sleep? Well, we usually point to the setting events. So it's about asking ourselves, what are the setting events that are blocking that reinforcing value of sleep? And there's several of them, several common ones, right? And when I tell people what the common ones are, they go, oh, really? It's like sometimes surprising. But yeah, it's not just about treating the behavior. If we walk in there and just treat the behavior, the results are not going to be sustained. They're just not, because we're not solving the actual core problem, which could be too much daytime sleep, not enough daytime sleep, screen time at night, or, whatever it is, parents laying down with their kids or whatever it is. If we're not treating those things and we're only treating the behavior in the middle of the night, we're not actually solving a problem. Not a sleep problem anyway.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess when it comes to the sleep treatment, you mentioned a number of areas that while it uses the same principles as any other series of behaviors, there are a lot of unique variations that have to go into the treatment of sleep problems. You can't see your way through it. Are there other ones that you tend to see as real barriers to making effective, sleep progress or treatment, helping with treatment adherence? Anything that jumps out as unique to sleep?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one, is really understanding the confounding variables that steal away the reinforcing value of sleep. And then also how parents get into these pickles in the first place, because it's usually in search of better sleep, right? So parents go down this wormhole of like just trying to improve sleep. And over the course, they develop all of these sort of, deficient sleep dependencies, these unsustainable routines. I call them circus tricks, it's sort of like whatever we do to get the child to sleep, but without the understanding that how they fell asleep is going to be how they need to be supported falling back asleep all night long. And so the notion that, well, we get them to sleep, but they don't stay asleep, I describe it in very normalized terms where nobody sleeps through the night. As human beings, we do not sleep through the night, period. Nobody, like a rainbow arc, falls asleep at bedtime and then wakes up in the morning. It looks like a wavelength where we go into deep sleep and then light sleep and deep sleep and light sleep all night long. And in those light phases of sleep, we wake up. But we as adults, we put ourselves back to sleep, right? We roll over, we stretch, maybe we get up to go to the bathroom real quick and come back. It's a self-preservation mode from our primal brain that says, okay, you got to scan the environment, make sure there's no saber-toothed tiger so that you can go back to sleep safely. But we put ourselves back to sleep multiple times a night. So if a child doesn't know how to put themselves to sleep at bedtime, they're going to have a really hard time generating sleep in the middle of the night independently when all of those things are gone. Especially, think about the conditions we ask a child to fall asleep under. Awake, alone, in the dark. How many times a day are they ever awake alone in the dark? Never. And so then, they wake up at 2 a.m. and they're awake alone in the dark. And it's like, no.
Right?
I'm 4 years old. I dissent. I will not be doing that. Thank you very much.
So in looking at a lot of the different treatment options available, I know we were struck the last time we talked about sleep and sort of assumed that there would be a more robust assessment literature out there for sleep. And then kind of looking at the articles, when you combine all the ones that had enough experimental control to be included in the meta-analysis, I think it was like 30 to 40% only had specific assessment types, specifically like functional behavior assessment. Many of them used other questionnaires and such, but again, not something we would say are gold standard assessments most of the time.
So the good news is it's coming. I've developed it. It's going to be researched with Candace from Learn Behavioral. I don't know if you know Candace over at Learn, but we're going to be testing out that tool. Yeah. It's an updated version of the SATT, which is, it's as gold of a standard as we can get because it's the only one out there, but it's outdated, right? It's from 2005. It doesn't take into consideration screen time and screen dependency and blue light exposure, which we know stops melatonin production and delays sleep onset 2 to 3 hours, combined with the screen dependence in our community of autistic learners. I mean, I would imagine it's exponentially higher than in the general population just because of the behaviors that we see around screen time termination, which is a huge confounding variable when we're talking about sleep. So, and it also doesn't offer solutions too much where, everyone who completes the SATT will, ping me or ping someone else and say, okay, I did the SAT. Now what?
Now what?
Now what? So I've designed a new tool that's roughly, kind of loosely based on the SATT, and that's the sleep assessment and treatment tool from Greg Hanley. But it actually offers treatment decisions along with it and treatment options. So saying things like, it's a basic questionnaire for the families to look at first, where we're getting all that background information. And then there's a kind of an interpretation. So if question 1 is, is the child pubescent? That's one of the questions that's on that tool. I give a rationale as to why this is important. So then you go down to the end of the tool and there's an explanation. If the child is pubescent, they may be exhibiting sleep phase delay, which is very normal during pubescence. As soon as kids hit puberty, they have a hard time generating sleep much before 11 o'clock or so. And that's a well-documented phenomenon that's been documented since the 70s that they've been trying to figure out. It's not just because teenagers are lazy and it's not just because, they'd rather not sleep, but there's this real situation that happens where teenagers have trouble generating sleep later. So I sort of explain that, so for every question that's on the tool, there's an explanation of why it's relevant and what to take into consideration when you're designing your treatment. So it's hopefully going to be very good, but at the moment, the only place you can get that is in the Sleep Collective that I offer, where I'm training people on it so that they can use it as just kind of a side tool. But I want it to be a standalone tool where anyone could take it without training and be able to implement it and design a program from it. Because we need it, because no one's treating sleep because they think it's outside of their scope.
It sounds a little like you're creating the PDCHS for sleep.
I like that. Yes, I'll take it.
Right? Because that's the one thing that I love about that assessment, right? Because you assess, and then at the end, it gives you some solutions and articles to read. So it sounds like you're doing something very similar.
Yeah, 100%. And it has all the medical screenings, and it has some data collection opportunities, and just things to keep into consideration without it being prescriptive. Because that's the last thing we need is prescriptive, because that's sort of what we have now is, extinction, graduated extinction, stimulus fading. And it's like, that's all we have, but we have access to so much more. I actually don't even include extinction in the tool. I think I was being passive aggressive about it. Candace will probably correct that and say, we have to put it in there. It's a valid, blah, blah, blah.
But, I think, it doesn't have a lot of social acceptability. So I can see why you could argue against it, right? So if I just went to a parent and said, I just want you to let them cry it out for the entire time. And then they're like, but what if I'm doing long-term damage? What if I'm harming my student forever? right? Like,
yeah, 100%. It's not, like I said, it's fallen out of fashion. The cry it out, it just doesn't jive with parenting, with modern parenting anymore. It didn't really jive with the older parents either. I mean, I'm 48, my kids are teens. I didn't love it, but I was like, I don't have anything else and I need sleep. So I was sort of left with that. Had I known then what I know now, I wouldn't have done the same thing. I would have done something totally different. But yeah, we need to understand that there's more options out there than just that. And to give people treatment options, 3 options isn't really options. And talking about social validity, it's interesting because I think it's in the Carnet. Yeah, it's in the meta-analysis. They actually do a satisfaction assessment, a Rykhov's assessment. 0 people rated it strong. Mm-hmm. Now, that was out of 13. It was out of the 13 single case studies. I think I'm quoting that right. 0. It was weak or adequate, right? Weak, adequate, strong. Weak and adequate was all that was voted on, basically. It was like almost 50-50, weak and adequate, and none rated them as strong. So that, I mean,
not great.
That's pretty terrible when we're talking about caregiver satisfaction. And we want, we want parents to be enabled to do these things when we're not there. We don't want, as BCBAs, we don't want to be there at 10 o'clock at night, and we can't be there in the middle of the night.
Yes.
It's interesting. I just spoke about this at FABA, but, Greg talks about televisability, right? That's the new word, and I love it. I think people love it. And, we always think about it in terms of what we are doing with the children, right? What are we doing with the children? Would we want it televised of what we're doing? But I think the question we're not asking is, are we giving caregivers tools that would be televisable? If they were being recorded, because they all are, everyone's got their cameras on. If a caregiver was being recorded at 2 a.m. doing what we're telling them to do, would they want that publicized? And I think at this point, the answer is mostly no. But because they're caregivers, it's like, oh, well, the caregivers can make them cry. It's okay. Which it is, there's really no evidence that crying is bad, but parents don't like it, and it feels uncomfortable. It feels wrong. They don't know how long the tantrum is going to last. They don't know how long the crying is going to last. And if it lasts more than 5 or 10 minutes, they're going to give up because it's
the middle of the night.
It's the middle of the freaking night, and I'm tired. And
go to bed.
It's 4 in the dang morning, and I know as the parent, if I just go lay down with them, all of this will stop.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you can justify almost anything in the middle of the night, honestly.
100%.
You're like, I'll work on this problem tomorrow after I've had a good night's sleep.
Exactly.
By making the situation.
Exactly. And then we worry about, the next day. And now, as the parents, we're thinking about what the behavior is going to be like the next day. They're going to be awful the next day. I just want them to get sleep so they're not awful the next day. And we are forced into this very short-term thinking where we're only thinking in 24-hour blocks. Mm-hmm. We're not thinking what's going to be long-term at 4 a.m. We just want it to stop.
Yeah, right. It's negatively reinforcing for parents, whatever the short-term solution is.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I could only do graduated extinction for 2 of the kids because I made a rule, and I'm very good at when I have rules, I can follow those rules pretty effectively. I had something else to do while they were crying, and I was able to know, no matter what happens, I know at some point I am going to address the distress that my child is going through. I'm not just like, go to bed. I'm going to go yell at you at some point. And it was like, no, I'm going to go in. I'm going to pat. It's okay. Then I'm going to leave, and I'm going to have another time and extend it. But again, not everyone likes following the same rules over and over. Not everyone is awake enough to be able to remember what the rules are. I luckily can wake up and then go back to bed pretty easily. Yeah. So I could see that being, like Diana, if I had not been there, I don't think that would have been a treatment you would have enjoyed doing ever. Meaning you might not have done it.
Right.
Yeah.
And where would the kids be now? Asleep, I guess, because they would have been up all last night.
They'd be still awake. One time, this one time, my dog peed in bed on my now husband, and he was really mad that he was in bed, and I was just like, "It's okay, just move over. We'll just handle it in the morning." I was like, he's like,
"No, still married you."
Right? He's like, "No, there's pee in the bed." I was like, "It's fine, just move over. You don't have to sleep in it." We ended up we did do that because he actually peed all over him because he was. My dog hated him, but when you're sleeping, everything seems like a good idea. That seemed like a great idea. I'm like, why?
Yeah,
we don't need to take care of this right now.
All I can think is it's going to seep through into the mattress. Like I for some reason, I can
gross.
definitely think future problems while I am still asleep. Like, no, this will be a problem that is worse to deal with tomorrow. I got to I'll take care of it.
But everyone has like a different capacity and tolerance for what I think they're able to handle. So this is always going to have to be individualized for the family, their comfort level, and what they are viewing as an issue too, right?
And not just that. I mean, don't forget, it depends on what cycle of sleep you have been woken up in.
Yeah.
So if you are woken up in a light phase of sleep, you'd be like, yeah, let's just take care of it and I'll go back to bed later. If you're in a deep phase of sleep and you get woken up out of that, you feel nauseated, you feel disoriented, you feel dead almost, like very, very heavy. You can't move your limbs because you've basically just come right out of a coma. And, so it also depends on when this human is waking you up to get their needs met is going to determine what your course of action is going to be. It really is like, we can't help the things that, we do in the middle of the night sometimes because, we've been asleep, which is a primal need that hasn't changed in the millions of years of evolution. It's never changed. Is that incredible? Our pinky toes are smaller, right? Our appendix has shrunk. We don't need our tonsils anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, things on our body have changed over evolution, but sleep has not. So it has to serve some kind of really important function to our health and to our existence, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey everybody, just real quick need to pause to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to this podcast, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast notes on your podcast player to go directly to the page for this episode. You'll need to enter in some key information, including 2 secret code words. These are special guest code words from Emily herself. And the first one is tangerine. Tangerine. It's a delicious citrusy fruit. It's like an orange. Or if you'd prefer, you can think about it as that band you loved from the 80s, Tangerine Dream. Remember them?
No.
No, okay. Well, then think about the fruit. Tangerine. All right, back to the episode.
I've tried to describe to Rob what it's like when I wake up. And I'm like, it's like being at the bottom of a pool and I can see the light and I have to swim to it.
Yes.
And it takes a long time.
It feels heavy. It feels nauseating.
Yeah.
It feels awful.
And he's just like...
But you've never described it quite so eloquently, usually because when you've woken up, all I know is...
you just get elbowed in the ribs.
It is very, Diana's...
I think that's what I'm saying.
Diana's awakening behavior has become so aversive. I'm almost like, just go to bed. I will take the children to school. I will do... I don't want to have to get whatever look you give me because you are still asleep and don't want to be here right now.
You're just lucky you're not getting throat punched. I mean, it's really what it
she
is.
doesn't have the energy. I'm not scared. I don't think she could put the thoughts together to attack me, but it's just the withering look. She can pull that one out in the morning, and then I feel bad, and But anyway, this isn't spousal sleep treatment.
No, but I think that I have a lot of empathy for parents who come to us with these situations. And, I had a parent once whose child was 8 or 10, and I always would, start my meeting saying, like, how are things at home? And I would pointedly ask, how is feeding going at home? Like, how's the kid eating generally? And how is sleep going at home? And it took a long time, but she finally admitted to me, she's like, he does not sleep at night. And he wakes up all the time, like, just like the problems you're describing. And she's like, but he's 8. She's like, at the time I had a baby. She's like, you have a newborn. Imagine having that newborn sleep schedule for 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what that does to you, your own mental exhaustion and your general family dynamic. Like, it ruins the quality of the family life. And that's core to the wellness of that family.
And not just that, I'm going to say it's also impacting their physical health. The most profound problem I ever worked with was a 16-year-old girl who hadn't slept in 16 years. And, we were in the middle of, I was working with the BCBA on the case, kind of a long-term thing. And after the first session, I said, this mom is probably going to get really sick sometime soon. And I'm not talking like cold or cough. I'm like big sick. And she said, she's had 2 strokes and she's just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I said, that's not because she's not eating enough kale. It's not because she's, not getting exercise. It's because she hasn't slept in 16 years. And, it slowly eats you away from the inside out. And it's this like silent killer. And most people who are experiencing heart attack and stroke and, late life diabetes, things like that, they're not sleeping well. In the general population, not just in the autistic population. But yeah, I mean, the problems persist much later into childhood for our autistic learners, for good reason, but like everything else.
Well, let's talk about some of the possible treatment options. So again, assessment tools, more coming. There's some information out there. It's a little outdated, but hopefully can get together some things in the meantime. Emily, I'm struck by the sleep hygiene. As every single of these papers, it was always a package of sleep hygiene plus something else. However, sleep hygiene alone never works.
No.
Almost to the point where I would say, well, why are we bothering with the sleep hygiene stuff? That's clearly not going to be the solution. I think you bring up a number you brought up a number of points at the beginning of the episode that it's not the same as say, let's use FCT versus whatever we were doing before. This is a very different type of problem. But it does seem funny that sleep hygiene just sort of kind of has to be there, like it's a pillar of the treatment, but it is almost never the treatment itself. I mean, what's up with that?
I'm going to tell you what's up with that. Rob, go ahead and define sleep hygiene.
Well, you want to have a bedtime routine, right?
I was going to say when you make
blue lights.
When you make yourself nice and clean before you go to bed.
My first thought was brushing my teeth before I go to bed, but I've fallen asleep plenty of times without doing that. So I don't think that's a prerequisite to sleep.
I'm not going to lie, though. When someone said that once, they're like, sleep hygiene. I was like, I have to have a nighttime skincare routine. And that's what I was thinking. And I was in an IEP meeting and I brought it up and they're like, everybody laughed at me. And I was like, I don't know. It's funny.
You just laughed along I meant that to be a joke.
I meant that to be funny. And then I looked it up later. I was like, not at all what I thought it was.
So I think our definition of sleep hygiene is very narrow, and I think that's the problem. I think when people think about sleep hygiene, even in these articles, I think they all sort of defined it in the same way, which is having a consistent bedtime routine, going to bed roughly around the same time, having a wind down, a calm down routine, something that happens in roughly the same order every night, things like that. But sleep hygiene begins from the minute you wake up. You have to be fostering healthy sleep for the rest of the night, starting the minute you wake up. And what I mean by that is if you're waking up at 9 a.m. some days and 6 a.m. some days, and you're letting the child sleep until noon some days, that's sleep hygiene. We can't have healthy overnight sleep and have an inconsistent morning wake up, right? When we talk about daytime sleep, daytime disruptions, how much up and down vestibular motion is the child getting throughout the day and then leading up until bedtime, because that sort of motion is addictive and incompatible with sleep, right? If we have a kid jumping on the trampoline 10 minutes before bed, but none of them controlled, I don't think, in their sleep hygiene, definition for limiting up and down vestibular motion or jumping and crashing. They talk about no exercise and limited, movement and things like that. But we really need to look at, other variables that are happening early in the day. Like, are they napping? Do we have our young adults consuming caffeine? Are they consuming chocolatey, sugary things at bedtime and sneaking in some caffeine? Or do we have cultural differences where they maybe are having black tea at dinner and maybe getting their caffeine that way? We don't talk about, the use of melatonin or other kind of narcotics or medication as part of the sleep hygiene. So I think there's a lot that goes into that one single word of sleep hygiene, which is why sleep hygiene alone, won't work. I mean, you can have the most amazing bedtime routine. I mean, you could be spot on. You could have all the good things, the relaxing, the calming, the magnesium bath with the Epsom salts, and you can have everything. But if you're putting the child to sleep too early for their age, they're going to have bedtime shenanigans. They're going to shenaniganize you for an hour and a half, because if they're 14 years old and you're trying to get them to sleep at 9 o'clock, good luck. My 15-year-old, if I wanted to get her to bed at 9 o'clock, there would be mutiny, right? She's not going to sleep. She's going to sleep at 11:30 when her biological clock deems that sleep is biologically available. And she doesn't do screen time because I take it away from her. So she crochets until 11 o'clock at night. Her body just can't. Her body just can't generate that sleep before then. So if we're trying to put our learners to sleep too early, it doesn't matter how great the bedtime routine is if lights out isn't in line either with age appropriate, timing, awake time, or a variable morning wake up, right? If you have a 5-year-old that slept until 10 a.m., they're not going to go to bed at 7. Right? So we really have to think mathematically too, right? And we have to understand waking windows and the body's drive to sleep and sleep pressure. And again, you're just back to what is manipulating the reinforcing value of sleep at bedtime.
So the variety of pieces that would go into, what you would consider all of the variables related to sleep hygiene, sort of giving it as advice to parents, it's often going to miss it's going to miss pieces.
The mark. Yeah. I mean, look, it's important and we have to include it in all of our programming, because in the absence of good sleep hygiene, we will get bad sleep. So it's not bidirectional where, okay, you have good sleep hygiene, so you're going to sleep well, but you are going to sleep well if you have good sleep hygiene. It can work in the reverse, where if we have bad sleep hygiene, if we are, and now I'm talking to all the adults in the room, if we are, on our phones in the dark until midnight, and then we have to be up, or our children wake us up by 6:30, there's no way you're going to squeeze 8 hours of sleep out of that. You're never going to squeeze 8 hours out of midnight to 6:30 in the morning. That's just mathematically impossible. So we're just not allowing ourselves enough time to actually fall asleep. So, all of these screen abusers at bedtime who are using screen time as me time, or for our autistic learners where families just say, yeah, they won't go to sleep without it, right? And it's become this sort of sleep dependence that eventually turns off, or they don't have access to all night long, or it runs out of batteries or whatever. That becomes, first of all, that pushes bedtime, by 2 to 3 hours minimum. And then it also causes those disruptions overnight when the screens aren't available. Mm-hmm. So you do have to have it. I mean, it is very important as part of the bigger plan. It just can't be the only thing we're offering parents. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just the screen time. Sometimes parents say, look, they get into bed at 8 with their tablet and they don't fall asleep until, 10:30 or 11. And I go, okay, well, let's get rid of this screen time. But I can't, in all good ethical conscience, whatever, in good conscience, say that's the only time of the day you're going to have a cessation program in place. Is bedtime going to be the only time we're going to try and take the tablet away? Because now what we run the risk of is a negative association with the cue to sleep. right? Now we've just designed a whole new set of behaviors when we line up screen termination with bedtime. Now we've just totally made bedtime aversive. So we have to be really mindful about our whole day of programming and say, okay, this child needs a screen cessation program. We have to start first thing in the morning, and we have to have offset. And same thing with the up and down vestibular motion, the kids who are just, on their trampolines all day, tail walking, kind of their motors are just always running. We have to design an offset so that when we create this offset as part of the sleep hygiene, let's say, it doesn't feel novel to the learner. It feels familiar. And it feels doable because it's something they may have already mastered earlier in the day. And now they understand the contingency that when, a caregiver says, hey, buddy, we have 5 minutes left, they can actually, give the device up at the end of that 5 minutes or whatever the cue is that we design.
All right. So sleep hygiene is an all-day experience in many ways.
I mean, you can't have it. Yeah. I mean, you can't have it both ways. I tell you, you can't have a child who sleeps until 10 and goes to bed at 7.
I wish. You know what? That makes me so sad because I think that would be my dream. I also love sleeping.
I know. But I have bad news.
I have an early morning waker, so then that forces me to go to bed early, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and we run into that a lot with families with the the early morning, 6 a.m. right? Okay, we think it's early. The child's like, done because I went to bed at 7, and 11 hours is plenty for me. So yeah, we do have to force ourselves a little bit to have better sleep hygiene, better sleep routines, things like that, so that we can squeeze out that 8 or 9 hours. I'm a 9-hour sleeper. I need 8.5 is my minimum. 9 hours is my sweet spot. And my kids know that. I mean, they're 13 and 15. They're like, night, mommy. And they come in, they tuck me in, good night. And I'm like, okay, see you in the morning. That's one of the benefits of having the teenagers with the kids.
I can't wait for that day.
I know. It's a good time.
I will definitely be tucked in. Even my friends, we hung out on Friday, Diana and I and our friends, and they're like, we better hurry up and do this because Jackie's going to fall asleep in just a few hours.
It's a gift.
It's true.
It's a gift. And look at how many negative associations we were probably brought up with, right? That we then transfer onto our children, right? We grew, at least me, I'm Gen X. I'm we grew up with sleep being either a reinforcer or a punisher, right? We grew up with, you can stay up late. It's a Saturday night. It's a treat. You get more awake time. You get to stay up late. That's the treat. Or, no, you're going to bed early because you had this bad behavior and now that's our punishment. And so we were raised with this kind of sleep being a contingency, sleep being either a reinforcer or a punisher. And it was used as collateral. I don't do that with my kids. Sleep is reinforcement only. You get to fall asleep. Woo-hoo, we get to go to bed. It's not like you have to go to bed. Being careful about our language too. It's time for bed. You have to calm down. And making it this negative thing rather than don't you just love sleep? Yes, we do love sleep.
So, Emily, we have, sleep hygiene is sort of more of a big picture than I think traditionally many of us have thought of sleep hygiene. And then sort of looking at the meta-analyses and looking at the reviews of research, there are a number of other kind of sleep treatments, though, like you've already said, most of the statistics sort of point to them as being, moderately successful. Some, different treatment options have various social validity agreement with parents. But could we just kind of go through what are some of the other, at least best used or best practiced sleep treatments that are available? And then also maybe whether some of them are not taking into account some of the other variables and the variations that we've talked about, in relation to sleep hygiene.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot of answers. A lot of questions to a lot of answers. Okay, so my favorite, let's start with one that people don't really know about too much, which I love very much. And Greg Hanley exposed me to it back in 2012. And I have since used it with, I would say, 95% of my clients, which is quiet-based visiting, which he's now calling scheduled exits. It's the same thing. Or scheduled visit. Yes. I don't know. They changed the language. But it's quiet-based visiting, which is basically the inverse of fervor, where we're only coming back in and visiting based on behavioral quietude. And something I've added to that is practicing protocols during the day, where we're actually practicing healthy separation, because what I've learned over time is that one of the main constraints to moving into independence at bedtime is a lack of healthy separation during the day. We have a lot of learners who are just stage 5 clingers who won't let caregivers out of the room to go get a glass of water. And this is at any age. This could be at 10 years old. This could be at 15 years old. This could be at 4 years old, where the caregiver just doesn't have the freedom to go to the bathroom and take a shower without the child being near them or next to them. There's just over time has developed like a mistrust basically of the environment is all I can really define it as. But I think if we can teach during the day, right? If we can teach some healthy separation, if we can teach a little bit of offset of attention, right? Or offset of presence, if we can teach 2 minutes, it doesn't have to be 5 minutes. I'm not going to do 20 minutes. I mean, some of the problems with things like Ferber is that we start with 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And some of the problems, I'll say, with our daytime waiting programs is they start with a minute. Why do we start with a minute?
Adjust.
Long
We need
time.
to start with 3 seconds, 5 seconds. We need to go back to peekaboo. We need to go back to obvious hide and seek. Do you guys know this? Like where you hide behind furniture, but they can still see your fingers, right? And they see you go, like they see you go hide. But their job
That's a smart idea,
right? Their job is to sit and stay put and exhibit some behavioral quietude while you go, in big air quotes, hide. So this is sometimes where we need to start with our learners before we start implementing something like scheduled exits at bedtime. Oh, that's what it was called, scheduled exits. Is that what I said first? Maybe that is. I don't know. Scheduled exits at bedtime. So we're teaching this sort of like, I'll be right back contingency during the day where we're saying, okay, I'll be right back. There's some offset, there's some behavioral quietude, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. And then we come right back in and we reinforce with our attention. And so then we build up slowly, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever intervals you want. There's no magic. It's just increasing intervals. Again, we don't want to be too prescriptive. We don't want to say you have to start with 1 minute, or you have to start with 3 seconds if the child can't even tolerate peekaboo. And then once they've mastered a minute or two, we can then manipulate the reinforcing value of sleep at bedtime, put them to bed a little bit later so that sleep pressure is high.
Yes.
And then we implement our scheduled exits. So we, implement quiet-based visiting, and they know the drill because we've practiced it to mastery during the day. Is it a little bit more involved? Yeah. But can we break it down to be super easy for parents? Yes, because parents will be okay practicing hide and seek and peekaboo for 3 to 5 seconds. 10 seconds, and we can write down 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and tell them, hey, if they come out after you, just go back to the last interval, just put a pin in it and try it again in 20 or 30 minutes. Try it again. Much easier for parents to implement during the day, for caregivers to implement during the day when everyone has their wits about them, rather than putting in some kind of an unsustainable program that's going to be like, no, you just have to walk them back to bed 6,000 times. And they might vomit, they might, they might get really mucusy. They might start coughing, but it's okay. Just ignore and redirect, clean it up, ignore and redirect, for what, 2 hours, 3 hours, because we haven't even identified the right bedtime.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
and that's traumatic for everyone.
It's traumatic for everyone. It's traumatic for everyone. So I really like quiet-based visiting. I've been, I've put my own bells and whistles on it, but at the end of the day, it's just intermittent reinforcement of a desired behavior, which is behavioral quietude. And it works. And, kids don't mind practicing it. And usually once we reach bedtime, they're like, where are you going? They don't really even care so much. And then, once we're at bedtime, we can do some of that stimulus fading. Maybe we're sitting up instead of laying down, right? That quality fading where instead of like laying with the child's, in this really restrictive position where they've got their arm like literally clung around you. Because look, kids are onto us. They are onto us. You have tried this garbage before, mom and dad. So I have now designed all of these protective measures, like putting my arm around you at bedtime so that you don't trick me in the middle of the night. And I think we've resorted so often to trickery and our kids are so smart that they're onto us. So we need to go the more gentle approach and the more systematic approach so that they gain trust in our systems. So if we say we're going to be right back, they know we mean we're going to be right back, and we're going to be right back really fast. instead of wondering where we went, because parents say this all the time. Hey, we've tried that. And I'm like, okay, but how long did you leave the room for? Did you leave the room and like go downstairs and cook dinner? And they're like, yeah, they didn't stay in bed. Well, of course they didn't stay in bed because they're 5 o'clock, they're 5 years old, sorry. And they have no idea where you went. So, you know, they've tried to trick the kids into falling asleep when, you know, the child doesn't have the prerequisite skill of, let's say, waiting. Mm-hmm. Awake and alone in the dark, by the way. Yeah. 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 2-year-old, awake alone in the dark. You know, they have to practice these things. They have to practice some of these things, have exposure. Some of these kids have never slept in their own beds. Mm-hmm. And then we go, oh, yeah, just put them in their bed and walk them back. You know, we're teaching the skill at bedtime, night one, in a brand new bed, a brand new room, brand new expectations. And it's going to go poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought your phrase mistrust of the environment was really spot on. And that is a useful way to think about this whole experience for some kids, right? If they've never been alone and are unsure what those expectations are, and they're really used to that parent there as like their SD for safety. Sure. Right? 100%. Then suddenly we're putting all of these different demands on them in a way that could be really distressing.
Yeah. It's in our best interest to make sure that the kids are happy in their sleep environment, right? I mean, if you think about it, you know, the parents will say, oh, we bought them a big boy bed or a big girl bed and we're so excited and, you know, now they're going to sleep in it. And I say, well, have they played on it yet? No. Right. Why? Because, I mean, think about it. Why would we go and play on the bed? The bed, we're kind of taught as parents, like, no, the bed shouldn't be a place for play. No toys in the room. Nothing, you know, it has to be like a bland environment. And I could not disagree more. I could not disagree more, especially if we are in the process of learning and transitioning. We have to teach them through play because that's how children learn. You know, mostly the kids that we're working with, they learn through play. So why wouldn't we make the sleep environment happy? Why would we only associate it with leaving? Why would we only associate it with solitude and boring, unstimulating, boring? You know?
Emily, could you talk a little bit more about sort of, you know, what might be the mechanisms behind that? Because I've always been of the mindset, you know, I know that the advice is don't do anything in bed except for sleep. Like don't read, but I love reading in bed. Yeah. And I don't think I have bad sleep hygiene practices in that I usually read for a little bit and then I fall asleep or I fall asleep while read. Like I can't, me too. I'm just so used to that's where I sleep and I go right to sleep. So I've never seen it as if I do anything other than sleep in my bed, I'll be doomed to be awake when I'm lying in bed. I go to sleep. It's my bed. I don't love going to sleep, but it's fine.
That's the social media message that they want to like instill the fear of reading in bed in you. No, here's what I have found is that children don't wake up to play. Mm-hmm. They're not going to just wake up to play just because there's toys in the room. They're going to wake up because something has woken them up and they don't have the skills to fall back asleep and something has manipulated the reinforcing value of sleep. And so perhaps they find their toys and they play because they don't know what else to do. But what I find, first of all, I don't usually find that either. I think maybe I have found one child that wakes up in the middle of the night for the specific reason to play. And mostly that's because they've been so restricted in their play during the day that that's the only time that they have found access to their items. So there's that. Most kids, when they wake up in the middle of the night, they're seeking parents to get back to sleep. Why? Because they're seeking a primary reinforcer. They want to go back to sleep, but they need help doing it. So they come out and, you know, they find parents and they need help getting back to sleep. And then it turns into behaviors when we're like, no, but you do it by yourself. No, you know, I'm going to walk you back to bed and then leave again or something like that. Or, you know, then parents are, you know, twisting their backs in the twin beds, trying to get their child back to sleep. But yeah, no, I disagree. Look, I think it starts with infancy for safety, where we don't want any toys in the bed because we don't want our children suffocating and dying in the bed, right? We don't want any toys. We don't want anything in there, right? For obvious reasons.
That time ends, though, right? You know,
right. Yeah, I mean, that eventually ends. But what I will say is I don't treat infants and toddlers as much anymore. But when I was treating infants and toddlers, for the means of sensitizing them to their sleep environment, like when they were trying to transition from co-sleeping into a crib, let's say, I put all the toys in there during the day. All the flippin' toys, like put them all in there, play tea party, play all the things mom and dad, play with your baby, play with your child in bed, play, and then leave for 3 seconds and come right back. Leave for 2 seconds, play obvious hide and seek, go towards the door, come back, go a little bit out the door, come back, go further out the door, come back. No matter what age, that's appropriate. I don't care if they're 9, 12, 17, or 2, it's an effective strategy because we are pairing happy, right, with togetherness. And then what we're doing is we're fading ourselves out just ever so slightly while the child is engaged, not in screen time where they know we're leaving, like they can't be like distracted again, like back to the trickery, right? So I had to learn early on that I had to be really specific about the activities that they were doing on the bed because parents would be like, oh yeah, I gave them their tablet. I'm like, no, they're too distracted, right? They don't care whether you come or go. But really designing a whole new contingency, a new expectation for the bed, around the bed, for the cue to sleep, and making it calm and peaceful and happy. I just think it's in our best interests. I will go back on that slightly when we are in a family in crisis, where there's an urgency to sleep quickly through the night. If there's illness, if there's family trauma, something like that, where it's just, we are desperate, we need them to sleep like yesterday. That's the time when we go, okay, there is a place probably for some graduated extinction, something a little faster. Assuming that's not always the case, we usually do have some time on our side to do some of these more like prerequisite practices.
Sure. So, Emily, I wanted to ask more specifically about like the faded bedtime sleep restriction research, because I know when I've read sleep research in the past, that's come up a lot. I know in the meta-analysis, the research quality wasn't good enough for the faded bedtime routine with or without the sleep restriction to sort of get put into those higher echelons of moderate or strong results. But it seemed like it had a lot of social validity. It seemed like there was a lot of effective research. But I almost wonder whether you see those as separate treatments, because a lot of the components that when I think of like what might go into a faded bedtime routine does feel in line with the way you were describing sleep hygiene and, you know, the reinforcing value of being in bed and, you know, that being a place that you want to be so that the primary reinforcement of sleep can just sort of take hold. Do you see it that way? Or is it just sort of, that's just how they used to call it when they wanted to pigeonhole the treatment back in the day, or they didn't know what else to call it at the time. So,
I mean, I think for research purposes, you have to kind of parse it apart because you can't just say sleep hygiene and then just assume that we're also talking about sleep restriction and things like that. I mean, fair enough. I think, you know, in all fairness, I think you do have to kind of separate it out a little bit. Some families, we can just do sleep restriction and that's the end. And I'll give you a perfect example. We have a child who's anywhere between the age of 2.5 and let's say 4, right? And the parent's main complaint is that they don't go to bed until 10:30, 11 o'clock. The first thing I say is, what time are they napping and for how long? Because not everybody who's not a parent knows that the nap drops sometime between 2.5 and let's call it 3.5, maybe 4. It can drop as early as 2.5.
It's a sad day.
Right? It's a sad day. It's a sad day. But if we're not looking at that, right? If I'm just like, you know, Jane, you know, a 20-year-old BCBA who's just like, you know, bright-eyed, I know all my ABCs and I know all the, you know, I know my standard acceleration charts and my, you know, whatever, parsimony, everything. We go, okay, well, your child's not falling asleep till 11, you know, just, well, put them to bed earlier and like, you know, just ignore their behaviors or whatever, right? But really what needed to happen is sleep restriction. We needed to drop the nap and put the child to bed at like 6:30. Right? Like, let's see, what time did they wake up? They wake up naturally at 6:30. Great. That's a normal time for a 2.5, a 3-year-old to wake up between 6:30 and 7. Great. They're waking up at 6:30. Great. Bedtime is going to be between 6:30 and 7, mom and dad. And they're going to look at you like you're crazy, but you're going to say, but wait, you're not going to have that nap. So don't worry. Your child will be able to generate sleep. And sure enough, I don't even have to treat those clients. I just say, oh yeah, sad day. Emily brings bad news to the table. Nap is over. But you get a child who's asleep by 7 p.m., 6:30, and now you get the rest of your night to do whatever you need to do. It's easier to get a babysitter when the child's already asleep, right?
True.
And so sometimes we never even have to go through the sleep hygiene or the, faded bedtime. We don't ever have to go through any of these other, like what I call circus, any of the programming, when the simple solution was we just have to drop a nap. Mm-hmm. And a very common extension of that is the 7-year-old, the 9-year-old, where we go, hey, mom and dad, guess what? They don't need that sleep at 4 o'clock. Because they're crashing on the bus when they get home at 3, because they've had garbage sleep, because they were up until midnight.
Yeah.
And then they had to be up at 7 a.m. for school. And so they're falling asleep on the bus. And now we're in like a really disgusting dishwasher cycle. And all we have
I was just going to say.
Yeah. And
the dreaded car nap will just throw everything out of whack.
Everything. And so, with those older kids who have such like crummy sleep, we go, hey, let's start on a Saturday or a Sunday when you have complete 100% control of their sleep schedule. Let's do some sleep restriction. We're not going to let them crash on the couch, right? We're going to put them to bed at a normal bedtime. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, or maybe take a long weekend or take, Thanksgiving or something like that when they're, a couple days off from school. And then we can work on sleep in isolation without the variable of the nice, cozy, rocking, shaking, vibrating white noise of the bus, because I sleep on the bus.
Oh yeah, it knocks me out every time.
So I would love a good nap on a bus.
I know. So sleep restriction has its place, right? I mean, it does definitely have its place in treatment, because sometimes we can get away without having to do anything else, and it's a very easy, very I'm going to say easy-ish for some families. But it's simple. It's like, I never thought about that. And then once the awareness is there, the families go, we could do that. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't seem like such a big, animal, the big beast to have to tame.
Well, Emily, I really enjoyed your conceptualization of sleep hygiene and some of the sleep components. I think on the one hand, it's a little harder when I tend to learn a new treatment. I would learn these are the 5 treatments that you can use, and this is how they work. So this is a little bit more organic, but I think having some understanding of sleep, it has been very nice to sort of hear more of a unifying, not exactly a theory of sleep, but you kind of unifying principles that surround the treatment of sleep problems. But I do have a couple questions, but I think they might be best saved for a trip to the dissemination station. Oh no, we fell asleep on the way here. It's too comfortable a ride.
Do you know what I was singing you the Big Bird and Sesame Street Morningtown ride when all the train people get on the train and they all fall asleep? That's a song. Do you remember that? I used to have it on
what's
a
that
record.
From?
It's called Morningtown. It is from a 1979 record called Sesame Street Sing-Along, where all of the characters go into Bert and Ernie's bathroom while Bert is in the shower. Risque! And they all sing, and at the end, the Michigan State Marching Band comes into the bathroom.
I know that one.
Right?
Man, I don't. Man, I thought I was up on my 70s Sesame Street. But
we can listen to it tomorrow. It's on Apple Music because I downloaded it because I used to have the record.
So when we're talking about competence in sleep, and I feel like when we're just talking about sort of basic ABCs of sleep, I feel like I'm there. But in talking with you today, Emily, it does seem like there are so many additional factors around sleep, which not necessarily insurmountable, but that I would have wanted to have someone who could sort of give me some of the extra information or point me in the direction of these are other things you need to be taking into account because it's related to sleep and sleep only. Kind of what are the key ones that you would say if someone is interested in sleep or they're being called upon to do sleep treatment, what do they need to be thinking about? How do they need to go about getting that additional information? Because it might not be in some of the sleep books that they could grab for.
Yeah. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time. Craig Canapari, he's and I'm going to say we have to look outside of the behavioral sciences. We have to look outside of ABA for these resources because they don't exist here too much. Greg has his, FTF now has their 7-hour thing. I have the Sleep Collective, which I just launched, which is the first behavioral sleep specialist certification program, which I'm really excited about. So we learn about that. That's a 5-week intensive with one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and 12 hours of CEUs. But I don't invent anything myself. So I glean everything from people like Craig Canapari. I'm sorry, he doesn't have the podcast. He has a newsletter, like blog. That's pretty amazing. Matthew Walker, he is kind of the head of the sleep sciences people these days. He has a great podcast. His book, Why We Sleep, really gives some good context to things, especially like circadian rhythm correction, melatonin, infant sleep, what happens to the brain when we sleep, and why some of these things might not work that if we just ABC it. And it kind of paints a reason of, why, just simply walking a child back to bed won't be sustainable over time. I have my own CEUs that go pretty deep into the variables that impact the reinforcing value of sleep so that we can, at the very least, start thinking a little bit more dynamically about why the behaviors are happening beyond the 4-function contingency. Because we have to look at what's manipulating the value. We have to look at the EOs, and we have to look at those FDs a little closer before we can just say, oh, they're just coming out for attention. They are coming out for attention. They are. They are coming out because they're trying to escape. But there's something bigger at play, which is, why aren't they trying to access that primary reinforcer? What's getting in the way? So I just launched the collective. We've got, on October 30th, we are launching my second round of the collective. We'll be doing it again in January. So for anyone who really wants to dive deep and be a behavioral sleep specialist, I think that's a great option. The CEUs that I have through my website are also really good. They're, if I do say so myself, I may plug my own awesomeness. No, I'm just kidding. No, but they've gotten a lot of feedback where people look at this information and say, I never knew this. And it's, I really just think that the avenue towards better service provision is just through just more knowledge of the stuff that's already out there. We just have to look outside of our own fence. But it's there, I didn't make any of it up.
Emily, I appreciate
it all together.
I appreciate you having these resources, because I think usually we get to that. We ask that question a lot, depending on the topics. If it's a topic we not everyone is as familiar with, and it's you find a mentor. And yes, these are all very important things. However, it's really great when someone can say, "Here's a place where you could just get the additional training and have those resources." So, thank you. I always appreciate a one-stop shop. So I'm excited. I don't do sleep treatment myself. Just so cool. Oh yeah, no, don't worry. We'll reiterate that. And we'll link it there, so everyone can get that.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is that since Greg stopped disseminating on the sleep stuff himself, kind of back in, kind of the 2015s, and he's moved over to the amazing work that he's doing for practical functional assessment. It's just groundbreaking stuff. No one really picked up the reins and continued on with that messaging of how important sleep is and how pervasive it is in our population. And so I just feel like it's just, I don't know, I'm obsessed with it. It's so important. And I love sleep myself. And I know that it just enhances every aspect of family's life. And, we can do it within the scope of ABA, right? We can't send them to sleep specialists. We can't send them to a sleep consultant because they only treat up to age 5. Right? I mean, we could, but they also don't treat autism. We can send them to the doctor. They're going to end up with a prescription or a clean bill of health, right? Who is going to treat the kids? Who's going to treat these kids? And I think it fits nicely into the scope of ABA practice.
Emily, it's a bit of a tangential question, but have you ever had to do a sleep study where they put all the things, all the electrodes, hook you up to an EEG, and they try to watch your sleep patterns?
I have not myself, but when in my very early days, I was a child life specialist back in 1999, 2000. And we had to do that a lot for seizure disorder kids. So I do have a good idea of what is involved in that. The good thing nowadays is that sleep studies are not that intensive. They just kind of send you home with a vest and they test for, they can get they can't get the polysomnography or anything like that. They can't get the actual brain activity, but they can get pretty darn close with some non-invasive stuff. And you don't have to go, if you're recommended for a sleep study, let's say, if we're ruling out some apnea or any other kind of seizure disorder, maybe not seizures, but other sort of, sleep disruptions, things like that. It can be done pretty much nicely at home within the comfort of the home. But yeah, no, that stuff's terrifying. It just looks terrifying. And to have a child who's on the spectrum have to sit, usually they have to get sedated. And so it really is, sometimes obviously necessary, but yeah, I have not had to have that happen. But
I'm just thinking. Yeah, when I was 19, there was a thought that I might have sleep apnea, and I had a relative who'd recently been diagnosed with sleep apnea. And all I remember is I fell asleep, I had all these electrodes on me, and then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was like, "This is awful." And I just lay there in bed for hours, and it was boring. And they were like, "Well, we got a little bit of data, but you stayed awake, so we couldn't. Do you want to do it again?" I was like, "Absolutely not. I'm fine. I'll just." Whatever happens to me, happens to me.
Well,
I'll move on with my life.
My husband did the same thing. My husband is a terrible snorer. And I know, right? It's like my plague is like the person who like adores her sleep. Like, he snores. But he had to do a sleep study and he ripped the thing off in the middle of the night. He didn't have to go anywhere. It was just one of the vests that you wear. It's just, and a little thing on your finger. It was really non-invasive. He's just, he's a man-child. And he ripped it off in the middle of the night. He's like, "That's enough." And so we took it to they sent the data, whatever. And they were like, "Well, you were up most of the night. We didn't really get it. We had to do it again." And he's like, "I don't want to do it." He was feeling suffocated. And I'm like, "Dude, just a vest and like a little pulse ox on your finger. Like, come on. Like, God forbid you actually get the flu one day." It's gonna be end of the world, right? The man flu.
So, Emily, you spoke about assessments and updating the assessment tool and doing some research around there. Are there any other big sleep questions that you wish whether you answered it yourself or someone came to you and said, "Emily, by the way, I've got this paper that answers that question you had about sleep and sleep treatment." What are the big questions we still need more information on?
I know for a fact that it impacts learning. I want to know to what extent are our learners losing out on opportunity. I want to know how much better they are performing under a well-slept condition versus a poorly slept condition. I would love that data. I would love that. I mean, I don't have the reach for that, but I would love to know when a poor sleeper suddenly starts sleeping well, how that impacts their progress for ABA services, whether it's behavioral, decreases, whether it's, their language increases, whether it's they start making progress on, simple programs, short-term memory, because we know for a fact from the sleep sciences that our short-term memory is compromised. Our behaviors are compromised. We're more impulsive. We make poor decisions. We have inattention. Our focus is awful. So, I know it plays out in treatment. I know it does, but I don't have any evidence of it. I just know it does. And I just feel like, I think we need to have that quantified. I think to light the fire under ABA agencies to prioritize sleep.
Anecdotally, I don't have your answers, unfortunately. I asked the question too, so of course I don't have the answer. But anecdotally, I have noticed that the days when I know I have not gotten sleep, I have gotten better at identifying, I'm starting to get short with people. Yep. I'm starting to see every problem is insurmountable. Mm-hmm. And sometimes just telling myself, well, you didn't get much sleep. That's the problem. Sometimes that actually snaps me out of it and I'm able to sort of function again the way I want to. Just the acknowledgement of, I did not sleep as well as I should have. I stayed up too late, even though I haven't actually biologically improved my situation. I can power through better, I guess.
There's hard evidence for that, though, in the sleep sciences, and it's not anecdotal. And what you're feeling is observable and measurable, and it has already been observed and measured. It's just not in the ABA sciences, but it's out there. We do perform very poorly. They've done some side-by-side studies where they give people information one day and ask them to recall it. They give them the same information the next day and they can't recall it. These are studies that have been duplicated and have been coming out, in different versions of them for years. So we know that it impacts it, and why we're not applying that knowledge and making these assumptions, right? They say trauma-informed or trauma-assumed care. I'm going to say, if we have a severely impacted client who, the behaviors just can't get under control and they're not acquiring skills, things like that, I would wonder why we're not looking at sleep first and saying, hey, I'll give you an interesting, I know we're like running short on time, just very, very, very interesting. In the last cohort of the collective, I had 2 people take some anecdotal data, just tally marks, because they were both positioned in the severe intervention program, the emergent behaviors. It was kind of like emergency, hey, fix this child's behavior. And they were both responsible for the intake. So I said, hey, while we have you guys here, over the course of the collective at the time, it was about 3 weeks that I gave them, 2 or 3 weeks to take some data. I said, just over the next 3 weeks, take some data and just ask the question for any new intakes, ask about sleep. Over those 3 weeks, we had 9 intakes between the 2 participants, and 100% of the responses was, yes, there are sleep problems. So that's anecdotal, right? That's just me saying, hey, make a tally mark, ask the question, is sleep bad? You happen to serve the severe and emergent population, just take some tally data for me. And they did. And it was not a surprise to me, but I was a little bit aghast that it was 100%. And that of the 9 consumers, of the 9 learners, 9 of them were struggling with sleep and being referred for some pretty intense behaviors. So,
wow. Well, Emily Varon, you're on a mission. And you know, as we wrap up, we want to say thank you certainly for coming on the show. And if you could repeat again, how could people learn more about sleep, check out the collective? Where should they be going for this information?
Just readysetsleep.com. Let's see, as of recording today, my website's getting a facelift, but hopefully by the time we launch, hopefully the website will be done. But readysetsleep.com, you can always find me. Also on Instagram at Ready Set Sleep with a little underscore at the end. I post things there too. LinkedIn, Emily Varon. But yeah, come find me and I'll connect you to the right resources.
Well, we want to send a big thank you to Emily Varon for coming on the show. We had so much fun talking about sleep. It's definitely one of those episodes where we not only got to review a little bit of what was in the research that we read, but we got to go way beyond that, which is always incredibly exciting to do. And we hope you enjoyed hearing that conversation and learning more yourself. Again, if you want to learn more about sleep and Emily's work and to get some more resources, you can go to readysetsleep.com. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of the show, so we want to get to the very last section, which is pairings.
Well, thank you, Rob. So pairings is a section of the show where we talk about previous episodes that might seem relevant after you listen to this episode.
They might seem relevant.
They might, but we really only have one, to be quite honest with you, that maps onto this episode. And I'm pausing because I think I wrote down the wrong number for it in my notes to myself, because I think I am about to direct you to the pica episode instead of the sleep episode.
Great episode, I'm sure.
Yep, but I was wrong.
Okay.
Can you believe it? Okay, so the episode that you should listen to is episode 32, which is titled Sleep with Dr. Sandy Jin. And that's a real good one. If you like sleep, go back, listen to that one. For pairings, I also like to recommend a snack. Today, I would recommend a wonderful snack that I think is lovely before bedtime, if you are inclined to eat snacks before bed. And that is a treat that I've been making my kids recently, and it is warm maple milk. So you take milk, you add a little bit of maple syrup or honey, will also be delicious. You warm it up, the microwave is totally fine. Give it a good stir, and that is delicious. And then if you really want to go over the top, you could also serve it with something else I've been enjoying lately, which is this chocolate chip oatmeal bar that I made the other day. And it has peanut butter, oats, egg, chocolate chips. That's about it, really. Oh, I think it has some honey. Delicious. So good. Perfect bedtime snack.
Excellent. That sounds very good.
Yeah.
And now that we have a snack and we're all ready for bed, let's tuck ourselves in with a few last bits of information. Certainly, we don't want to put anyone to bed without saying thank you so much for listening. And we hope you enjoyed the podcast. We'd appreciate it if you subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You could also, when you wake up in the morning, because you don't want to do this right before bed, check us out online in a number of places. We're at abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of the articles that we discussed on this episode, as well as links to all of our previous episodes, and also a place to purchase CEs for almost all of our episodes. But before you do that, you probably want your second secret code word. It is watermelon, WATERMELON, watermelon. Where we are, it's going to be hard to get watermelon because we're going into the fall and the winter. But if you live in a warmer climate, you may be able to still get some good watermelon to have. So that code word again is watermelon. We also want to make sure people don't forget that they can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track, and they can join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where they can subscribe for as little as $3 a month. But if you subscribe at some of the higher levels, like 5 or 10, you can get access to our episode polls. You can get access to our book club polls, and then access to our live episodes, or our listener choice episodes, I should say, that we do once per season, as well as our book clubs we do once per season, and then get some extra CEs, no additional charge, just as a thank you for being a Patreon member. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And some big final thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, put your nice big warm blankie on and keep responding. Bye.
Bye.